Hello and welcome back to my channel. Um, I'm Paul Mars, for those who haven't been here before. It's Mars, M-A-G-R-S, and I'm going to keep saying that forever because people get confused how to pronounce my name with its silent G. Anyway, this is my bookish channel where I talk about the books in my life and my library and zigzag my way through my reading across many genres. My voice is a bit rough today, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. It's because Jeremy was DJing last night in Overdraft, our local bar, late on Easter Sunday night, and the noise was so fierce from all of his disco music that our little gang sat under the speakers, had to yell at each other for about 5 hours, which we did. There's always a lot to catch up on and a lot of talking to do, and new people coming into the group, and lots of chatter. And by the end of the day, by midnight, my throat was in tatters. And this is how I sound today. Anyway, here are a pile of books I want to talk about. Today is green. This is an idea that I got from somebody I follow on YouTube who had a pile of green books because it was spring. I thought I would take the idea further and talk about rainbow books because I organised some of my shelves in rainbow colours for Pride one year. And I love doing that. And I love the juxtapositions of one genre against the next. As I keep saying, in writing and in reading, I am entirely genre fluid. So today we've got to green. We've done red and yellow and pink. And if you follow the old song, uh, it's green next. Cilla Black did a fantastic, i.e. terrible version of that song about rainbows. I'm a big fan of Cilla Black's records. Right, so I've got a huge heap of green books. Moonhearts by Charles de Lint in 93. I could never read this copy again, I think, because the print is so minuscule. Um, he's a Canadian fantasist, and I've read many books by him over the years, and I find him wonderful. His is a whole world that you go into, a world in which you're in contemporary, i.e. in this case 90s Canada, and it's usually artists and musicians, and then there's fairy creatures that come from the other world through the woods into their world and interact. It's kind of before we had that whole genre of dark urban fantasy, which did similar things. There it was all fighting. His books are romantic and spooky and really inventive. And it's a long time since I've read this, possibly 30 years. I think this is my original copy. Again, he was somebody I was introduced to by that bookshop in Darlington that had all of the remainders from America in different genres, all stacked up, all 75p or £1.50 for thicker books like this. And it was the first time I read some wonderful writers. And the first time I picked up, I think, the best of the year horror and fantasy anthology. I think that was true. The one that Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling edit and have edited for years and years. And that was an introduction to a whole lot of people as well. Right, about that time, slightly earlier, in 1990, I read J.D. Salinger's Stories for the first time. This collection, For Esme with Love and Squalor. It's called in this country. In America, it's 9 stories. I'd read Catcher in the Rye as a sixth former doing A-level German, and we spent all our time talking about books that weren't on the syllabus or even German. We had a really wonderful teacher called John Gallagher, and we were a very small group of people doing A-level German literature. And we would spend the afternoon talking about Leonard Cohen and how he was rumored to be making a disco LP. Or my friend Nicola would suddenly talk about The Catcher in the Rye. We were 16 and we were reading it for the first time. John Gallagher was in his early 20s and he read it for the first time, and we just sat talking about Salinger for quite a long time. On summer afternoons in 1987, I guess. And I was writing my first full-length novel. on a typewriter, and he took the pages away and he typed them up because he had a word processor. He typed the whole novel. My teacher took away my pages and typed up my novel for me. It is just incredible, and looking back, it was very, very sweet, and he was a fantastic teacher. Anyway, at that time, The Catcher in the Rye was the only Salinger I'd read. Then when it got to May 1990, I'd been doing my second year courses at university, lots of reading, but I did make sure that I read at least one book a week that wasn't on the syllabus. That seemed important to me, to broaden my horizons in all sorts of ways. And I remember that was the first time I read Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. I found it in W.H. Smith's, which had a tiny book section in Lancaster. And next to Isherwood, there was John Irving, and I read him for the first time, The Hotel New Hampshire, that spring. So all of these were kind of life-changing books. Amongst them, as I worked my way through this tiny book section, was J.D. Salinger's Thoresme. And it begins with A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, which for many years I thought was the most perfect short story I'd ever read. And I don't know why even. Somewhere there's the description when he's in the swimming pool of the crazy reflections in the water cast on the swimming pool water by the sun. And I remember being stuck on that for ages, how much I loved that description, the crazy reflections. I think it's in this story. Because of course it's crazed like the kind of crackle surface of something fractured, but it's crazy because it's Seymour, and he's losing his mind in this story. But it's so many things as well. I do remember that leaping out as just a fab piece of writing. The whole story was, and all the others in this went straight to my heart. I've reread him again and again over the years, and you know, he is somebody you read when you're younger, and you crave more books by Salinger. I always wish those books promised by the biography, various biographies, the books that never came out that he wrote before he died, I wish they'd come out. I wish we could get those missing books. Maybe they never even existed. I don't know. This is my copy of The Sword in the Stone. It's a really beautiful hardback with illustrations. I do have an anthology somewhere where there's a chapter that's so beautifully illustrated. I've got various copies of this. I haven't read all of T.H. White. I should have, and I wish I had. Again, I've got a big, huge volume of all the whole thing, but the print's far too small. This is a nice copy with nice large print. What I love about The Sword in the Stone is when they meet Merlin. And if I've got this right, he's moving backwards through time. He lives backwards. So when the young Arthur, when Wart goes into his study, there's, you know, potions and a crocodile hanging from the ceiling and all the kind of wizardy stuff. But there's an old TV as well. And that to me is pure magic. The idea that Merlin is from their future. I think I've remembered that right. If not, it should be. Nog in the Nog. Peter Firmin and Oliver Postgate, two of my all-time heroes. As well as making their TV shows, which were labor-intensive, you know, moving their characters second by second, building these worlds out of felt and cotton and papier-mâché, and making these 5-minute films for children's TV. Also, they wrote books at the same time. They adapted their stuff and made new ones and illustrated them. And this is a stapled together volume, very old, The Ice Dragon. They made beautiful books, and you can feel the effort and the love and the attention that have gone into these as a piece of, not a piece of merchandise, as something that's worth having forever. And that's what I love about both Oliver Postgate and Peter Firmin, that they made things for kids that were going to stand the test of time because they cared. They cared so much. Michael Morpurgo, who I've got mixed feelings about, because I once read a book about a polar bear that was rainbow coloured, who was told he'd have to hide his rainbow colours um, if he wanted to survive in the Arctic. And I detected a kind of slightly anti-rainbow feeling to it, and I wasn't sure about that. I thought, "Ooh, is this a bit dodgy politically? You know, hide." As John Lennon said, "You got to hide your love away." I wasn't sure. Anyway, when he does good stuff, he does good stuff, and he rewrites The Wizard of Oz from the point of view of Toto just a few years ago. This is illustrated by Emma Chichester Clark, who um, generally I like her stuff. I love her stuff on her drawings for The Wizard of Oz in here and her Alice books as well. It borders on the slightly twee sometimes, perhaps, um, but here they're just delightful. It's a lovely, generous retelling, this, and a beautifully produced book. Weighty and nicely done. And, you know, he works his way through the whole story from Toto's point of view. And actually, it's a brilliant point of view to do The Wizard of Oz from. It's novel and it just gives it a slant. I love versions of The Wizard of Oz. We watched The Wiz this week, and it reminded me what a terrible film that is. The worst thing to do with The Wizard of Oz ever, I think. But I love Jeff Ryman's book, Was, which came out about 30 years ago. I loved doing my own adaptation for Bafflegab and Audible. About 4 or 5 years ago, we did a 4 hour long version of The Wizard of Oz with Jim Broadbent as the wizard and lots of other uh, lovely voice actors. It's a very compelling story. The thing I loved about doing it was that the whole story had never been fully adapted. They always pick and choose and miss out the good bits, some of the good bits, like the town full of people made out of china who jump off the roofs and smash themselves. Baum, some of his stuff is a bit like a kind of fever dream, I think. Um, it has that quality of dream about it. And sometimes, of course, he's way too sentimental, but there's a kind of a strangeness about what he does that I really enjoy sometimes. Anyway, that's a good retelling. Now, 3 green books in a series, and I've got one up there as well, but I don't want to pull it out of the pile because everything will fall off the shelf. Albert the Dragon by Rosemary Weir. She writes this story about a little boy in Cornwall who finds a dragon in a cave, and he's a bit of a snooty old dragon, slightly queenie, um, and he has a lot to say for himself. And when I was about 6 or 7, Albert the Dragon was my absolute hero. I loved these books, and I took them out of the school library again and again. They were illustrated by Quentin Blake to start with, and yeah, everything about these is wonderful. There's a Christmas story about Albert feeling as if he's going to be left out of the Christmas party that the townspeople are throwing, and how they welcome him in the end because there's a sudden snowfall and they can't get deliveries to the town, and he goes out to melt the snow with his uh, fire. Albert's World Tour. Albert the Dragon and the Centaur. And somewhere I've got Albert and the Dragonettes about his children. This one is, I've just noticed, signed. These are Grasshopper books from the 70s. And Grasshopper seems to be a publisher for children that did books in translation, European books. Not these, but other books in their list, when you look them up, the few bits of information you can find online, it seems to involve books from Germany, Sweden, France, a bit like what is published by, and I forget their name now. Uh, no, it's gone completely. There is a publisher that does similar stuff now. Right, now, one of my all-time favourite books. This is a very fancy folio edition of Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson. Burnett. I don't make a habit of collecting fancy editions of things. This was a gift. How nice to have. I have Charles Robinson illustrations. I have lots of copies of The Secret Garden. Something's just dropped out of The Secret Garden. It might be a note from Dickens, do you think? No. No, it's a it's a that's really odd that it fell out of that. It's from the Oscar Wilde bookshop on Christopher Street in Greenwich Village in New York. This certainly didn't come from there, so I must have used it as a bookmark at some point, but that's worth putting in my box of bookmarks over there. I love that kind of treasure trail that goes from book to book, telling you where you've been or other people have been. Secret Garden is one of those life-affirming books that is all about characters teaching each other to live again. Here, people are suffering from grief, from neglect, from tragedy, and just the right people are put in the right place. And at first, Misselthwaite Manor seems like the gloomiest, most gothic, most forbidding place to be. It's Yorkshire in the depths of whatever, winter. And we go with, is it Mary? Of course she's called Mary. Through these months of learning to live with these rough-tongued Yorkshire people, the servants at Misselthwaite Manor. She's an orphan, and she gradually, through Dickon, the little wild boy, the son of one of the servants, and the old gardener, and the screaming, spoiled boy who lives in the house, they find this garden walled around and neglected, and they bring it to life. They learn to garden, and they learn about nature, and they learn about magic, but magic not in a kind of wussy Harry Potter sense. Magic in the kind of magic that of things growing, of learning about things, of learning about other people, of being of receiving other people's affection and love and letting people into your life, that kind of magic. When they filmed it quite recently, they made it literal magic. And I seethed with contempt and fury. All this dreadful CGI kind of plant life coming, into flower in the garden. It looked like suddenly like the Amazon rainforest inside this walled garden. And of course, it was never that. It was never meant to be that. I thought that was an unspeakably horrible version of The Secret Garden. There are some lovely versions. There's a BBC radio version with Beryl Reid as the harsh housekeeper, and a really lovely BBC TV version from the 70s, which is the one I watched with my mum when I was a kid. So I knew this story even before we read it at school in 1978, with Mrs. Nellist, our teacher at the time, the woman who took me aside and told me that I must learn to fit in with my peers and not stand out so much, otherwise I'd have a miserable life. Horrible she might have been in so many ways, but she did read us The Secret Garden. She had fantastic taste in books. She read us The Secret Garden. She read us The Starlight Barking and 101 Dalmatians and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So she wasn't all bad. I'm running out of time. I must hasten